To the YANA monthly virtual town hall. This month, when we looked at the calendar going forward, a couple months ago, I realized it was African American History Month, and also happened to be the centennial of the very unfortunate Tulsa race massacre. So we can't cover everything. In fact, we'll share lots of resources to cover the history of African American culture, and we've got anti-racism work, the history of racism, the history of art, culture, everything going on in our country. We can't possibly cover that all here. There are a lot of programs going on through Yale and otherwise, so we'll make sure to share those resources. But we wanted to say thank you for joining us. There are lots of programs you could be doing. Our panelists could be doing a lot of other stuff, and they're joining us with their expertise and their viewpoints. So we're going to do things the YANA way. We're going to honor African American History Month by exploring the ways in which music, art, architecture, and built space environments through nonprofits, a lot of these, since that's our niche, in the complicated history of racism in America, how we can celebrate African American culture, and all this working towards moving us towards a more just anti-racist country. So our panelists are just amazing Yale affiliates here. Regina Bain, class of '98 and class of '01 from the MFA program, is the executive director of the Louis Armstrong House Museum. Really great stuff to share with us there. Jerome Haferd is architecture school, class of 2010. He is an architecture professor. He's a co-founder of a architecture firm. And I don't know if we had it in there, he's also involved with Dark Matter University, which we're gonna learn and hear more about. And we're also delighted to have with us Don Roman, class of '71. He is the board president of Steffen Thomas Museum of Art, and we're going to go into a lot about art and things in the South around the Atlanta region, and can't wait to hear what Don has to say. But I thought we would start with Regina, and we could start with what's your favorite Louis Armstrong song, and we could all go on forever about that one, as it's hard to choose. But just wanted to say, tell us a little bit about the Louis Armstrong Museum, Louis Armstrong as a person, how you came to be where you are. Yes. And I will leave it to you. And if you want to share your screen, please go ahead.
Great. So I'll just jump in and say a little about what we are and what we do. So Louis Armstrong, just in case you don't know who he is a Black icon, a musician, a vocalist, a trumpet player as a musician, a collage artist, a prolific writer. He was in over 30 movies. He had hit songs for 5 decades, and he was born in 1901. And the context of that is the repercussions of slavery, is everything that followed, is the civil rights movement. And he was able to move through that to become a superstar and known throughout the world. So that is who Louis Armstrong was. He was an amazing musician. He was an amazing humanitarian. And he was born in New Orleans, but he lived for 30 years in Corona, Queens. And so I am head of the Louis Armstrong House Museum, which is the home that he lived in for 30 years with his partner, Lucille. His partner, Lucille, is actually the one who bought the house. And these are 2 artists. She was a dancer, he's a musician, Black artists in the 40s who bought their own home in Queens and built a life there. He was a millionaire. He could have been anywhere, but he decided to be in a working class area in Queens. And now it is a New York State landmark, a New York City landmark. And along with the home, there's an incredible archive because Louis Armstrong was an archivist. He knew we would want to know who he was after him, and he wanted to tell his own story. So he recorded himself just playing trumpet, hanging out in his home. And all that has become our archives, all the letters he wrote to everyone. 60,000 pieces. It's the largest archive of any jazz musician, one of the largest of any Black musician, and that is in our care. And now we're about to open a 14,000 square foot building across the street from the historic home. And that's going to be a new state-of-the-art center with an exhibit curated by jazz pianist MacArthur genius Jason Moran. It will have a 70-seat theater in the back, and it will have the archives upstairs, and it will allow us to live Armstrong's values of artistic excellence, education, and community. And I wanted to just share, if I can, I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I'm going to fast forward to, this is Louis Armstrong on his trumpet, but I wanted to share trailer of something that we call Armstrong Now. And Armstrong Now is where we connected with contemporary artists. I'm moving quickly through the building, but we connected with contemporary artists to research in our archives and then create new works. And this is the trailer for what they came up with. So that is Louis Armstrong. That's who we are as a museum and who we are becoming. Thanks, Don.
Beautiful. We're going to get back to more because I want to hear about the house and Lucille and your own work that you've done. Don, I'd love to move over to you. You were involved with sort of a different kind of a museum, although it is a single artist museum in Georgia, rural outside of Atlanta. And wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are involved with this museum, what interested in you and kind of what's going on there.
Happy to, Rachel. Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here tonight and to present to this audience the Steffen Thomas Museum of Art. We are, I should say, a single artist museum, one of only 14 left in the country. And our namesake is Steffen Thomas, who was a German-American immigrant who came to the US in 1926, settled in Atlanta around 29, and lived for the next, 60 plus years until his death in 1990, creating art. He was a stonemason by trade. And so a very interesting part of his story is that he actually made his living building public monuments. And if you will think about the period in which he lived, that meant in many cases portraits of Southern political leaders, many of whom, most of whom were segregationists. He constructed Confederate monuments. One of his most famous is the Alabama Memorial, which is located in Vicksburg, Mississippi. If you, we'll get into it more, but there were many ironies about Steffen, and one of them, for me at least, is that despite the focal point of his creations, he always found a way to work his own themes into it. And he was a very strong proponent of women and workers, and as you will hear, Black people. So that is a very important part of my attraction. You asked, how did I get involved? And I want to reference an article I saw in hyperallergenic, hyperallergic, just this past week. It says, and it's written in today's time, in, as you say, Rachel, an atmosphere when a lot of things are coming into focus and into better focus in terms of what it means to be a truly equal society. And this author stated, creators from Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities need to be extra vigilant about protecting their energies as more white-led organizations explore the meaning of equity. If you're invited to be on a committee, apply for a job, or participate in a program, ask questions about making a decision. Ask about the organization's overall values and how those values show up in the daily work. Are they really invested in equity work or tokenizing people of color to give the illusion of inclusion? This may help you identify what's a yes and what's a no, or how much energy you're willing to give. Now that's a pretty hard-hitting, in your face assessment of exactly how not just people of color, but all people should view their philanthropic, and activities. How do the organizations align with values? And the one thing I would add to the very strong list that she gave is, can you make a meaningful difference? And for the Steffen Thomas, it was definitely the case that all of those things came into it lined up for me. I researched the organization's history, their goals and objectives, their outreach in the community, and I found that they were doing some good work. We are a small museum, small in terms of stature, perhaps. We are an hour and a half outside of Atlanta, due east. And it is obviously hard to compete with the High Museum. We don't try. We have our own mission, but in terms of getting the exposure, that quite frankly I found that this museum was so deserving of, that is a task, but one that I was willing to sign up for. I didn't go in expecting to be chair or president. I have an organization, frankly, that I was already chair of that is very near and dear to my heart. But I really felt drawn to the Steffen Thomas. Now, the artist was a very strong draw. I mean, his art, his life, his legacy, as Regina was laying out about Louis Armstrong, artists have the ability to impact communities in very powerful ways, be it through their music, their performance, or their art. And I had spent 14 years working on another artist, a woman, African-American woman, Mildred Thompson. And the parallels between Mildred's life and life journey, really, and Steffen Thomas was remarkable for me. Mildred, as I say, was an African-American woman. She born in 1936 in Jacksonville. She went to matriculated with none other than David Driscoll. They were there at the same time. And when she graduated, I believe in 1957, she had trouble, making getting a start in her career. She spent time in New York. She tried to hang out with the male-dominated contemporary art community there and was rebuffed. Dr. Porter, James Porter, who was the mentor for David Driscoll as well, recommended that she go to Germany. And she did the following year and spent the next 18 years there. studying, training, teaching, and she built a pretty formidable following. She turned to abstraction, and as I hope to share later, her work, I think, was master level. And that's one thing I need to emphasize in terms of the connection between the two, Mildred and Steffen Thomas. He was clearly trained in the German tradition to master all of the mediums, be they painting, printmaking, sculpture, et cetera, collage. You were to be good at all of them. And Mildred and Steffen both were very fit that mode. The point is, they were on parallel journeys, though, in reverse. He came here seeking artistic freedom from Germany. She went to Germany from here, seeking the same thing. And in large part, I think they both found it.
Beautiful. There's such interesting, I'd never heard of Steffen Thomas until I looked up the museum, and I'm happy that we can show some slides about we can get to the Driscoll exhibit. Maybe when we come back for the second round of questions. And I think it's interesting. You can see some of the images you've shared that Thomas did with a few things, snapshots you have of Driscoll and from Mildred Thompson. And it's just these beautiful threads and sort of parallel universes and things that they've encountered. And like you said, glad to know that you went to that museum feeling like there were some things that needed to be elevated and more people knowing about it. And by you coming to our program, we now have, hundreds of people who have heard about it. And I think we all feel a little bit better enlightened about it. And I hope we can come back to learn a little bit about David Driscoll, because I just was not an artist I was tremendously familiar with. So if you'll bear with us, we'll come back and we can show you, we can definitely share some images for our audience who may not be as familiar. So I want to move over to Jerome. Jerome, you've got a slightly different, we're moving from music and visual arts to kind of a spatial art, I guess I would call it, in architecture. You're located up in Harlem, you teach, you also are involved, we'd love to hear more about this with Dark Matter University. And then I'm curious, why architecture, and how is it that architecture and spatial design can represent or should represent non-hegemonic communities? And how does that work with the anti-racist work of Dark Matter, and how you fit in? So I'm going to turn this over to you and let us know a little bit about your work and what you're doing now.
Thanks, Rachel. And it's a tough act to follow these illustrious other guests. I'm honored to be part of the panel and hear more about your work with these institutions. And Don is saying his museum is small, but my practice is smaller, I assure you. But yeah, I'm in my office now here in East Harlem. I'm the co-principal of a small firm, and we do work here in Harlem, really trying to kind of consider ourselves as architects as part of our community. So a lot of our work is really working with artists here in the community and other small businesses right in our immediate vicinity. And then I also teach. So I also, am part of, kind of larger institutions in that capacity. And that, in a way, my practice really moves between those two worlds to some degree. And I think in some ways that speaks to your question. And I have a couple images I could show of some of our work here in Harlem, including a recent project we've done working with other small businesses of color, Black restaurant owners, as part of the Harlem Renaissance Pavilion project, which is up now on Adam Clayton Powell and 139th Street, really in a historic part of Harlem that has been done in collaboration with some other architecture firms in the city and some other local Black-owned architecture firms to produce outdoor eating structures for local businesses who are struggling right now. So I can show a couple images of that. But then with the kind of academic work, a couple projects that I became interested in really more research projects right here in Harlem, I think speak to this question of space and of the architectural discipline, and how we might speak to this issue of race and racism and the sort of kind of erasure of some of those histories from a lot of the cultural canon, a lot of the cultural disciplines. So one project that I've been kind of keeping track of and became aware of in the city was the Harlem African Burial Ground site, which is on the East Harlem River, 126th Street, and really fascinated me as an architect, as somebody interested in our kind of collective archive, and as somebody who has ancestors who don't know their history as African Americans. And so, there were even moments when beginning to kind of research that project where I began to wonder, is even one of my ancestors potentially buried at this site? And so that really provoked my imagination on sort of questioning that. And so I ran a couple of design studios with students at City College, sort of looking at taking cues from some important projects that have been done, like the memorial to Peace and Justice in Montgomery, otherwise known as the Lynching Memorial, and how a living memorial in the 21st century, for example, becomes a way that we begin to build agency around some of these spaces and reclaim them. So that's, I think, an interesting example of how actual space starts to enter this conversation. And then, so Dark Matter University is kind of in between those two worlds of the professional side that I do of kind of outside the institutions and these institutions themselves, as somebody kind of with a few years of teaching at multiple institutions under my belt, in the kind of move to sort of remote instruction over the last year in the wake of COVID-19 and the George Floyd protests. Myself and a few others, academics of color, are really banded together across the US to create almost a kind of independent platform that might exist inside some of these existing institutions where we teach, but also outside of them, and be BIPOC led to sort of create a kind of para-institutional space where we might begin to affect the pedagogy and sort of bring students into that space and discuss kind of anti-racism in the design disciplines on our own terms. So that's really been a very exciting thing. And I'm actually teaching a course right now between Yale University, Yale, where we all went, and Howard University as part of a collaboration with DMU.
Excellent. And I want to come back to some of the other, to talk about the field of architecture. I was going to do a little poll, and I did some research about, and it's also in cultural institutions. And Regina, you could probably talk about this with your work as cultural leaders in New York City, at least, and how few African-American leaders there are in some of these spaces. We can get some more into that, but thank you for giving
it. Very few African-American leaders in architecture, for example, especially academia, architecture academia.
Yeah, and we definitely want to get back in, because I think it's something, it's part of history, and we should all be learned on these, and not just associate a particular building or a particular style. And I know where John is in Atlanta, where he's from, Tennessee, there are a few famous architects, but as you pointed out, and I think as some of the recent surveys have shown, there are very, very few people of color in architecture programs and then becoming architects and design. And just glad to know we can share some of the information about them so we can get those numbers to grow.
Yeah, I mean, not to belabor. I mean,
really,
that is a huge part of what kind of where and we've known this, but there's been so little moving of that needle that there's a pipeline issue into these institutions and so many barriers. I think it's still 2% of licensed architects are African American. So even getting my license was a big deal to me because the needle has moved so slowly in kind of getting more numbers into the field. So could talk about that all night.
Yeah, no, if we had time, I'd love, we did a couple of programs on public art, and the people were talking about having community space and designing and being out there with the community and people involved in actually doing the murals on the buildings. and you said, it's the pipeline. It's getting folks interested in understanding and at a young age of what is art and how can you be part of it.
And it makes such a big difference. I mean, this Harlem Renaissance Pavilion project, I knew the restaurant owners because I go to those spaces already as a community member, as a person of color. And what happens so often is we have to go outside these communities for architects because the perception is that they aren't there, or maybe they aren't. So it makes a difference when you have architects of color to actually work in these communities.
Good. I want to get back into, because there are different, I mean, we can get into the nitty gritty of like, how does the difference of how one moves through space, how has it been, what's the anti-racist, view of that? Because the realities here, let's get into some of the nitty gritty a little bit. But Regina, I want to get back to you because I do want to talk about African Americans in cultural and artistic leadership positions. And I know you're connected to other leaders in New York City. Obviously, Lucille Armstrong herself is a kind of leader and having made sure that these archives were preserved. I guess you're also involved in Urban Bush Women. You've done a lot of leadership with Yale itself. I'm curious to know what your take is on sort of the role of leadership for people of color in these various fields in which you're involved in.
Big questions.
Yes, big questions.
So I'll start with Louis and Lucille and start with them as leaders. And I think artists aren't always deemed to be leaders. And I think it's helpful to frame them in that way. We just had a conversation about Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong. And it came up of Billie Holiday as being a Black feminist leader. And that framing for her that's not normally language that is used to describe her. There's often language that is used to describe her that is deficit-based. And so I'm thinking about Louis Armstrong as a leader, as an excellent trumpet player who was absolutely inspirational because of his technique. And so he led the way for the musicians to come behind him because of the depth of his prowess on that horn. And that type of leadership and that type of influence has reverberated for decades and is still around today. And Billie Holiday talked about wanting to sing the way Louis Armstrong played. And it was about rhythm and timing, that he played out of time. And that was new. So thinking about artists as leaders, as leaders of innovation and thought, Louis Armstrong definitively was that. But he was also a leader as a dark-skinned Black man who did not go to high school, who was able to make the impact that he had on the culture, not only of the United States, but across the globe. In France, in Russia, in Egypt, his name is known. And given the context of what was happening in America at that time, that's a miracle. He is an incredible leader. And so too is his partner. And sometimes his partner, Lucille, is thought of as, she's the wife. And she's one of four. She was the fourth wife. She was a dancer who, with her own money, bought their home and kept it up and preserved it for the future. When he passed in 71, she didn't pass until 83. And in that interim, she not only made sure that the space was going to be a New York State and New York City landmark, but she had his name throughout Queens. So there's a stadium, there's a school. All of that is due to Lucille Armstrong. So I think about Hamilton and that show and how at the end, it's about the wife. That is Lucille. So I want to start with those two artists as leaders. For me, I came to the Louis Armstrong House Museum via the Posse Foundation. And the Posse Foundation is an education leadership network based in New York, around the country. And it's the idea that leadership means thinking about how issues of diversity affect power and decision-making. That is leadership. And so that is something that I've tried to bring as I come to the Louis Armstrong House Museum. I started in August, so it's only been 6 months. But this idea of leadership, art, and education is deeply entwined in me. My family are educators, my mother, my grandmother. I went to the Yale School of Drama and graduated as an actress. And then I have this incredible experience that I had with the Posse Foundation. And all of that is being put together into the space of the Louis Armstrong House Museum. And that's being done in partnership with incredible Queens organizations and New York City organizations. So there's this group called Culture at 3. And it's where cultural leaders across New York get on a Zoom call every day from Monday through Thursday at 3 o'clock and just talk about really logistical things like, how does the PPP loan work? How do we navigate that? And one of the things that I am part of is a subcommittee that is about anti-racism. And in that space, the larger space is 700 people. That space is smaller who choose to come to that subcommittee. And we have in-depth conversations about We See You White American Theater, about the things that are happening in culture. And when I say culture, it's museum, it's dance, it's all of that. And what our responsibilities are as leaders. And I have been blessed by that space, been challenged by that space. And I think that is the work of leadership. We have to put ourselves in those spaces so that we can grow.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And it's just fascinating. I'd love to hear more about some of the conversations, like, what are the cultural and artistic leaders in New York really talking about?
Oh, yeah. We're talking about a lot.
Okay. All right, we'll get back. I'm sure we can get some more. Don, I want to get into you. You're all of you are leaders in your own right. But you mentioned another organization, I think picks up on education a little bit, that Regina was talking about. And Don, you can feel free to talk about this any way you wish. Obviously, you're working with or bringing forth African-American artists who might have been leaders in their fields. And we can look at the David Driscoll, and you talked about Mildred Thompson. But you've also been interested, and this is kind of with respect to art institutions. People now are rethinking who's on their board, who are their donors, who's their audience. And Don, you had looked into that, the role of, with respect to art, who are collectors, patrons, clients, and how that might be connected to Black families and community wealth. That's sort of a long question, but just an aspect, you've got so many different parts of your life. I just wanted we could share a little bit more about, that kind of role that you played in the private space as well.
Well, I certainly, I'm happy to do that. I definitely want to get back eventually to the core question you raised about today's environment, because things are changing, and I think we can be happy about that. The change has to be constructive, obviously, but the fact that our institutions, our cultural institutions, mainstream institutions are opening up, I think, while good, I think we need to keep an eye on what's happening back in the community. Our artists, particularly our visual artists community, is not a monolith. And while the major museums and institutions open up, they could do that in the most powerful ways possible, and never impact the lives and careers of the majority of artists of color. I spent 40 years as an attorney or financial advisor, consulting with artists on their various issues. I came to that by virtue of my avid interest in collecting. I've been collecting for 40 years, and as my reputation as either a lawyer or financial planner grew, I had artists coming to me with their issues, and they were born out of the, frankly, exclusionary the issues were born, that is, out of the exclusionary practices of most of the mainstream institutions. So they had issues like, getting exposure, selling their work, being treated fairly in those environments. But in the end, in particular, estate planning issues. As an attorney, and then turning the bulk of my career and years in financial planning, I saw many of the obstacles artists of color had, in particularly in preserving their work after their deaths. And so that's really how I came to have the relationship with Mildred Thompson. When I met her, she was within months of her death from cancer. And her parting words to me were, protect Donna, who was her partner, and protect my art. That was a weighty, imposition. I mean, I really felt the weight of her words. I felt a responsibility to do everything I could to see that she got in death the recognition that she failed to achieve during her lifetime. I think Mildred was a major artist, and her story is yet to be told as widely as I think it will eventually. But I will share this. I worked on that with Donna and that estate for 14 years. But just recently, in the last 2 years, Mildred's work was prominently displayed at Art Basel. On the outside of one of the major booths down there, adjacent to the food court. And that we will see that piece. Actually, you may want to bring it up. It's from the Magnetic Fields series, the yellow and red, 8 feet by 12.
I'm going to share my screen, and then you let me know if I'm getting the right pictures. All right.
No, well, that's not the, well, we can go there first.
Okay.
What's going up is an exhibition that Donna and I were able to put together in 2004 or so, down in Jacksonville, her hometown. It was called Sister Circle, and just 3 artists: Mildred, Elizabeth Catlett, and Samela Lewis. You'll see there on the left of the screen one of Mildred's favorite pieces. That's from her series called String Theory. And string theory is for those who are not in the scientific world, the study of how matter behaves at its lowest molecular level, like a string. And that's what Mildred depicted there. She had she developed an interest, I guess, mid-career in the sciences, physics in particular. And one of her mantras became making the invisible visible. Okay, so this is this series here. These are large triptychs, 8 feet by 12 on the 3, not the one on top, the diptych there. But they're from her Music of the Spheres series, and it was based on the solar system and how color and movement, how light intersected in outer space. She actually had a music composition that accompanied this series. But beautiful work. She called on Saturn. There was Neptune, Mars. Strong work. But I wish you could get to eventually. We'll get to magnetic fields, which is the work that was shown down in Miami, the 2018 Art Basel.
Okay, hang on. Let me see.
While you're looking, and I want to make sure that I make the point. We must do, particularly as a yearly and our environment, we have the ability to play a role in making sure that our cultural institutions open up, and that their resources and ability to impact artists is shared equitably throughout the industry, in this case, art. But we can't forget the other artists that won't be impacted. You have to, we need to make sure that we also make an effort to provide the resources that they will need as well to further their careers. Again, the biggest issue I hear among artists is access to media, access to all of the institutions that determine whether their work is seen or not. I would probably need to add one other issue for many artists. Many artists of color have made the decision they don't want to have that impact, have their careers connected to the museums. I think Steffen, Thomas, and Mildred belong to that club. They want the freedom to control their work, but they also have an interest in making sure that it is shared as widely as possible, as opposed to the exclusivity that necessarily follows the gallery model. That's an issue for artists of color that I think we have to be sensitive to. I frankly have been forced to be sensitive to it by some of the artists who I collect. They are very intentional about making sure that their work is made available to as large a community as possible.
Interesting.
What you're looking at there is our current exhibition, celebrating creative genius, the art, life, and legacy of David Driscoll. I like many people, celebrate David as one of the most important artists and figures of our time. And
did you want to talk about
I'm sorry?
Did you want to talk about the other ways? Hang on. Hope I didn't mute myself. No. I can show you some, we can put his work up, but you would also send some other projects and arts by high school students involved with that.
Yes, well, I was about to say, David passed last year at the High Museum in honor of his great work and life. Is doing a retrospective, and as we speak, on David. We are within 30 miles of David's birthplace in Edenton, Georgia. And I thought it very important that we recognize him, help the community, many of whom were not aware of David at all, make them aware of their connection to him. The fact that he actually got his start right there in their community. it was also important to me, given my focus, as you say, on the education, to involve the children, the youth of Middle Georgia, many of whom, frankly, never get to enter a museum. We've had an arts outreach program for 20 years, since the inception of the museum. Steffen Thomas's daughter, Lisa Thomas Connor, was an art teacher. And it was important to her to include arts in education as one of the missions of the museum. What you see here is the winning work of at the high school level of the artists who participated. We reached out to the 5-county area, to the art teachers, and they had their students compete in our program. We asked them to create work inspired by David Driscoll. They came up with their own statements, artist statements, and work, and I was blown away. You know, this is wonderful work, and it really. Lisa and I were just talking about it on yesterday. I was out there. This is what we envisioned, what we hoped to accomplish. It really does really beg the question: is there the next Driscoll in that very group? The work is clearly strong. These are 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Mm. And the artist statements, you'll ask later, but now you're getting into David himself. Mm-hmm. You see him here with Romero Bearden. You see him with Benny and Andrews, and another Georgia native. These go back decades, obviously, but David forged a career that I think rivals any in his reach, in his scholarship, in his untiring efforts, really, to raise the profile of artists of color.
I hope we've introduced him now to people who may not have known him. And can we see things online to see some of his works?
David's work at the museum. We have our exhibition up now. It will be up through April 17th. And you can go to the website, steffenthomas.org, www.steffenthomas. Steffen is double F. Mm-hmm. steffenthomas.org. You're looking at a bronze piece that Steffen did called Tremonisha,
right?
Tremonisha, thank you.
There we go.
Tremonisha. Tremonisha is taken from the Scott Joplin play. And it was, as for those of you who don't know the history, Scott Joplin had a terrible time getting the play produced. And eventually he did it at Morehouse College in 1972. What you see on the left there is the program from that performance at Morehouse. It was tucked inside the bottom of the statue. And Lisa found it years after her father passed, while she was dusting off the statue. And that's not the original. We have it in the archives. But there you see where it was hidden. Not hidden, but stored. But the story fits so well into the narrative about Steffen Thomas, both in terms of his interest and his focus during his lifetime in education, the connection with education as the place, as education as the way to help Black people find their road to freedom. Tremonisha was a baby found under a tree. A Black family raised her, but she was always so fixated on the tree itself that they changed her name to Tremonisha. Later, the townspeople, the mother helped her to get an education, and later the townspeople chose her as their leader because she had an education. Steffen Thomas apparently attended that premiere at Morehouse and came back and created that bronze piece in tribute.
Yeah.
Go ahead and show the next one, if you would. I think I saw Nixon and his gang.
Yep.
That's the ceramic piece that Steffen did in 1974 as Nixon was being run out of office. I put it that way because you can see what Steffen's views were. You see on the left the back of the birds there, and I think you will conclude as I do that they are intended to be buzzards. And then you see their innards exposed on the front. The pictures don't do it justice. When you see it in real life, it's very stark.
Well, hope we can get down to see it.
Yes. I do invite everyone to.
I want to put a pause here because I want to make sure we can come back and get some other points and some Q&A. But I do want to, if we could take just a minute, I'm going to turn it back over to Jerome. I unshared my screen. So Jerome, Don, you just wrapped up so many different ways of like arts and culture and music and things overlapping with perhaps some African-American leaders in these spaces that we may not have been so aware of, or some of these connections didn't always know. So Jerome, let's go back to architecture, your space, what does it mean? And we can talk about, the history of some famous African-American architects, or you can talk about, what does it mean now? So I'm going to hand it back to you and talk about leadership in the built environment from a person of color's viewpoint in developing that space, and how can that be done? So I'll hand the microphone back to you.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we could talk about a lot of historical figures, but I think it's interesting to sort of tie into, I think, some of what actually both what Don and Regina have said with what I'm thinking about right now, because there are these sort of kind of now being more recognized, say, architects, right? Not that many, though, honestly. And then even many who are still alive. Walter Hood, the landscape architect, comes to mind, who you guys may know, who is now being given a lot of recognition. But this is someone who's been practicing for like 20, 30 years, who was producing amazing work and being really under-recognized for that work. So there's a lot of thoughts. And then there's just the innumerable, I think when you're asking like, what does anti-racism mean in sort of architecture, right? As a kind of cultural discipline.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting, difficult question, complex question, but it's, and I've been thinking about this a lot and kind of teaching and thinking about this. There's a great book that was just published, Race and Modern Architecture, by some colleagues of mine, Mabel Wilson, Charles Davis, and Irene Chang at Columbia.
That's our resource list when we send things out.
Yes, check it out. And what Mabel really sort of puts out in the others is that it's an epistemological question. Yeah. That is like how we are even receiving the packaging of these disciplines of, say, architecture is, and how we're taught it in the schools and take it as gospel is really really filtered through the lens of a kind of Western modern project, right? And that comes with it a lot of different values, from the most abstract aesthetic values to, you know, much more nuanced kind of ideas about the city and so on. And what I think is very interesting about this book that Mabel and her colleagues sort of put on the table is that ideas about social order and race are really at the foundation of some of those ideas, of even how we teach a discipline like architecture, about human difference and a kind of order of hierarchy that even gets manifested in architectural style. So when Donald Trump says, you know, we need to use neoclassical architecture, that's really laden in some of these like fundamental ideas about kind of difference that you can even talk about on a very kind of abstract aesthetic level. So if I could share my screen for a second,
please.
You know, so that this is, can you see my screen?
Yep.
So, you know, stepping back, so when we talk about the city, this is a map on where I outline where the site of the Harlem African burial ground is, right? And so you see in this map kind of superimposed what was becoming the grid, right, of Manhattan, you know, overlaid on sort of indigenous kind of settlement. So again, this thing that to talk, you know, very literally about architecture and the city, something like the grid being proposed as the sort of city plan for a city like New York and many other cities is not neutral. And so when we talk about an anti-racism in architecture, it's to kind of recenter and value the innumerable, maybe non-professionals of color, the innumerable indigenous people, African people who were building this country or already were here, had ideas about urbanity, city life, that have not been enshrined in how we've manifested the built realm. Right, so different values to that. So this is just a couple images of the student work that I was overseeing, where these young students of color, mostly of color, are sort of starting to think about, you know, how do African Americans move through space? How do we move our bodies? How can, you know, what is Black space? What is a different value system that might exist on a site like this that the city wants to develop into kind of affordable housing, so-called. Mm-hmm. So again, I think these things enter into sort of urban design, I think, more legibly, but then even more, you know, I'll kind of jump over here. I was trying to think of even a kind of more sort of like abstract example. So this is this project, this pavilion in Harlem that we've just done. That's a collaboration with the artist painter Thomas Heath, who's standing there next to me in the sort of middle ground of this image. And so it's sort of this small structure that is kind of fulfilling several different programmatic requirements, very, very functional, right? Form follows function. But there's a kind of architectural and painterly discourse happening in this structure. And I'll go back to a drawing that we made here that I was thinking about when Regina, it's Regina, right? Was talking about jazz and Louis Armstrong. And so this is an image, this is an early drawing we made, well, not so early, of the structure, which you can see the kind of rational system of the architecture here. This is a side view. And what I think is a kind of, when we think about, you know, the different histories, different viewpoints in something like the design of a structure, right, in architecture, which is, you know, at its heart, again, like painting, like literature, like music, one of these disciplines. I was actually thinking a lot about jazz as a kind of historically, say, marginalized mode of production, right? And how jazz is almost coming out of what we would call mistakes. And you make enough mistakes that you make a new rhythm, right? So we really thought we thought we would enlarge the paintings, which very literally, as you can see across the length of this structure by Thomas Heath, illustrate a kind of ancestral progression of the diaspora from the slave coast through the Great Migration north. You know, so there's the content of these paintings, but then there's the way that we thought, can these paintings begin to sort of like dance across the structure and not be so rigid and be loose and play around? And we even had much earlier versions of this structure that the actual vertical columns were kind of in odd places. Like if you think of a musical sheet and the jazz, the little notes that are they're not on the same rhythm. And that's how jazz was, something like jazz is created. And you can trace that right back to African dance, right? Where it's a different rhythm. And those things, just as an architect, as someone teaching architecture, there are different even design methodologies that can come out of that thinking that have not been as central.
Before we move on, Regina, can we pop you in? Like, can add some thoughts to the visual display of well, there's a historical chronology there, but also this concept of trying to visualize jazz.
I'll say.
Go ahead.
I'll say that jazz is a philosophy. It is a way of thinking about the world, a way of manifesting relationships, and those relationships come out through music and the way that the conversation that musicians have with each other. And this is me talking as not a musician. I'm not a musician, but the way that I think about jazz is as a conversation that allows people to step forward, to step back, to have emotional arcs that go away from the foundation and come back. And all of that, it can be expressed through art. All of that can be expressed through philosophy, through the ideas about democracy and how we take space musically, how we claim space. So there's a project that we started, which is called Voices of Freedom. And it's where we are working with high school students to do programming, free programming, and then workshops on top of that. And it's in partnership with Young Arts. And it's where we have 5 different disciplines, jazz being one of them, but writing, visual arts, dance. And we're looking at the scope of Louis Armstrong and then thinking about how that specific discipline connects to social justice. One of the ways that we did that, one of the artists did that, was to think about the jazz cadenza. And the cadenza is that, and I'm not a musician, so if there are musicians out there who want to correct me, please do. But a cadenza as the opener, the announcement, I am here, trumpet player, riffs, and then the rest of the band comes in. What does it mean to claim space musically with your cadenza? And to step forward from the band and say, I'm here. And then this artist, linked that to claiming physical space and gerrymandering, and what it means to take space on a musical level and on a physical level, and thinking about a community. And so that those types of juxtapositions, to think about artistic concepts and juxtapose them with social justice concepts, I think are critically important, especially right now. Right now for a lot of reasons, partly because the work that we need to do as social justice leaders can be tiring. Mm-hmm. And in order to sustain oneself, I think they need to be coupled with art and artistic concepts. And so if we're able, and we know this because of the way, what we saw in the civil rights music, there was always music. Civil rights movement, there was always music. We have to couple social justice concepts with art. And that will sustain us in the long run, and sustain our leaders.
You guys, I don't know about everybody else in the audience, but you maybe want to like run out and write a paper on the connections between claiming space in jazz music and architecture. I mean, fascinating. You guys, we could talk about this forever. But I want to just maybe take a pause. Leanna, do we have questions that from the audience that we could share with the panelists? If you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask some.
Yeah, so Tim Delaney, he posted this in the chat as well. So I'm not sure if he wants to maybe say if there's actually a question that he has. He said Regina mentioned PPP loans. So he wanted to highlight this opportunity for nonprofits and gave some links there, but we don't have any current questions right now. If you are attending right now, please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A section.
I'll note there was an earlier question and I'm trying to find it. There was someone who asked about the Newport Jazz Festival. And I'm scrolling back to find it was early. I'm not sure if he's still here. Philip, I believe, yes, asked about that. And so I texted Ricky Riccardi, who is the head of our archives, and he said, yes, we have it. So Philip, if you are interested in seeing this work that I believe you said you edited and you worked on, it's in our archives. And our archives are accessible digitally. This was an amazing gift that came to us from the Fund 2 Foundation to digitize all of Louis Armstrong's archives. So you can go to our website and watch this jazz festival from 1974 that features him. I think it's critically important for all artists to archive themselves and to make sure that they are speaking their own truth with their own words and in the way that they want, so that when others come to try and tell their story, they have already told their own. And Louis Armstrong did that.
I love that. Don, maybe we can go back to you on that point, because you said Mildred was maybe not, was she archiving herself, or she was asking, trusting that to you? And we also have the Driscoll stuff that that's now at the museum, and it's kind of being archived there. So
let me share several points there. First of all, Mildred had not taken the steps to archive her work. She faced the same issues that, frankly, many of the artists that I've been in touch with over the last 30 plus years have. First and foremost, being focused on the art. That's their first focus, and many don't want the trouble of having to deal with that. Regina's certainly right, though, that it is important to history. It is important to the canon that they actually make an effort. The challenge for visual artists, though, is that it's easier said than done. I mean, they do need, I believe, in institutional help. And so one thing I'd like to see come out of the current social justice movement is an effort to put in place programming, not necessarily housed in museums, but in agencies and other non-community organizations. Give them the resources. Many times they know who the artists are in their local communities, and they can help those artists to tell their story. I could name you 5 artists that I've come in contact with over the last couple of years who I think deserve the same kind of recognition, frankly, that I see that I hope to create for Steffen Thomas. Mildred certainly won. She has eventually gone the route of the galleries. She is represented for the first time in death rather than in life. But even that is 15 years after her death. She came to be represented, and hopefully that will result in the kind of exposure that that her work deserves. All artists won't get that opportunity though. And I think that it is incumbent upon us who care to do what we can to really get to get the resources marshaled to impact this problem.
It's interesting. You raised some interesting point. Maybe I'll put this back to Jerome about archiving one's art work, and maybe in architecture, and maybe you know, person of color's view of architecture. Is that something that would have to be built and get, like, you know, city status as a you know, historic place, or it gets landmarked and things? It's like somebody set that as a standard for archiving architecture. How would it might work for the new reconsidered, you know, space from, you know, what you said, what is Black space? What, you know, how might that be? Is it something that would be archived and permanent? Is it temporal? What would be your take on that kind of concept?
So, just so I understand, are you asking about like the role of archiving in architecture?
I think we're talking about, because we've either had you know, the story in his own life. Regina's talked to us about what Louis Armstrong was able to do. Don's also talking archiving in the sense of, I guess, preserving. And there's lots of folks who are not even in the main space that they would warrant being in a museum or getting historical landmarks or things like that that would be archived on their own. Who's setting their standards? And is that coming up into, as you're thinking of what does this space mean, is this ultimately to get to some place where, yes, we want to see this thing standing here in 100 years from now, or is it a different concept?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. There's a couple things that I think that makes me think of. I mean, on one level, the short answer is our institutions are making a lot of those decisions. And then what, you know, architects and artists, of course, are kind of, you know, anointed as sort of being important, right? Which is part of the conversation. And, you know, you're seeing finally some major shows of Black architects at a place like MoMA, right? Where the reconstruction show with some of my peers is opening in a few days on Friday. But a lot of these institutions, as we're discussing, you know, there is very little archive of African Americans or people of color. But even then, like, you know, I think with architecture, it can be a little bit different because buildings themselves become a kind of archival project,
Exactly.
which was part of the whole thing with the Harlem burial ground. It was a barracks, it was a casino, it was a bus depot, it was all of these things. And, you know, what happens, I think, with like historic preservation and kind of historic, you know, landmarking of buildings, a lot of the historical buildings and a lot of the history is what's kind of in the official archive, which is often being kind of preserved and maintained by these powerful institutions. So it becomes like a self-fulfilling thing in a way. And the whole kind of thing with that space was that there is no official archive, which is a whole other question. That we could get into.
Continue, but it's just an interesting way to think about these things. Regina and Don, people are wanting to know, since we started this whole series on the arts, about how you're, you know, I hate to say, you know, shifting to online virtual during COVID-19 to make sure that your institutions are sustainable, that people can still access what you're doing. We can look at things online. We can always listen to Louis Armstrong music, but in a sense of sure, I can go listen to Louis Armstrong music, but how do you stay in control of how you want people to learn about it or know about it when it's kind of, we're scattered and we can't actually come and look at the archives and learn? So Regina, I'll start with you first. People want to know how you're doing during the COVID-19 and
yes,
what's next?
It's a challenging time. It's a challenging time for many artists and for many artistic institutions. Ours is a house museum. It's a house. It's intimate. It's supposed to be, but that means social distancing, and ventilation are not necessarily the best that it could be for COVID-19. And so we are closed to the tours that we would normally do in this house museum. We've experimented with doing tours, but we can only have 3 people on the tour, which can be excellent. It can be very intimate and can have a great deal of learning for those 3 people. As a business model, it is not the strongest, but it is possible. What we've done is to take the mission online, and the mission is to preserve and share the legacy of Louis Armstrong, to live his values of artistic excellence, education, and community. And we can definitively do that online. And one of the amazing ways that that's been done are the head of our archives, Ricky Riccardi, created something called That's My Home. And this is a series of virtual exhibits taking advantage of the digital archives that dive into stories about Louis Armstrong and Lucille Armstrong at home. What were they doing at home? And that's something that wouldn't have happened without the necessity to expand our mission online. The Armstrong Now video that I shared with you, that was originally intended to be in-person performances. So these collection of artists who were, that we said, we want you to do research and we want you to create a performance live, which would have been seen by 200, 300, 400 people. These performances were then shifted to be mini films. So they're the 4 30-minute films that were created. And now they're able to be viewed by thousands. And we're able to have talkbacks with people who we wouldn't have been able to gather in the same room to discuss the work. So we had a talk back with Bria Skomberg and Dax Devlin Ross and 15 other folks, all in the same room, who we wouldn't have been able to do that. So that is the type of creativity and innovation that we've had to do that stretches our skills. We are not videographers, but we needed to learn how to do that. We can't wait to get back into the home though, because that is the heartbeat. It's the foundation of what we do. But when we return, we will never be the same. We will always be hybrid in our mission to have it be in person and online, because we've learned too much to go back.
I think we're hearing that from a lot of organizations. And Don, before I return to you to see how things are going at the various museums with your involved, Regina, I wanted to get back to with education, what maybe you don't know that. What does the younger generation think about jazz? I mean, I sort of sometimes feel like my kids joke at me because I'm listening to music from the 20s to 40s, and there's a whole museum and we're steeped in it. But is it relevant?
Yes.
Are people out there composing? Are they interested in it?
Yes, they are, and sometimes they don't know it, but they are. And so part of our mission, part of what we need to do is to help them see how they are already in the legacy of jazz, how they are already in the legacy of Louis Armstrong as they create their work, that there are things that were put in place by these early artists that are taking it for granted now, but that they started. So Louis Armstrong was one of the first musicians to step forward from the bandstand to be that soloist. He played out of time. When musicians talk about him, they talk about time, they talk about light. And those things reverberate today. So we did a panel about Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong. There were some younger artists there. And one in particular was very clear that his muse, Billie Holiday, was directly in the line of Louis Armstrong. And so he saw a lineage from Louis Armstrong to Billie Holiday to him. Wow. And that's one individual, but that's one very influential individual who knows his history. Mm-hmm. And that's our job, is to teach that history. And so we do that through extensive programming with young people, specifically K through 6, who come through the house and we go to the schools. And now we can do that online, and we can do that in Idaho, and we can do that in Russia. Yeah. And so that's what we're doing, to make sure that young people know this history so that they can see themselves in a legacy. There's so much more to say.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the jazz is a whole discipline. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a musician either, but I'm fascinated and just amazed by people who can do that. So, because you have to know the grounding, right, to be able to do the riffs. And I don't even know, I'm not a musician, but anyway, thank you for doing what you're doing. Don, let's go back. People want to know, how are things going on with the museum during COVID and some of the, I know this is, I only ask this because it's in Atlanta, it's in an area that I saw that there are a bunch of historically Black colleges and universities are starting a whole center and they're building it in Atlanta. And I'm just wondering, like, how are things going down there during COVID, and how can we stay informed about some of these artists who may not have gotten as much attention before?
Well, first of all, let me address COVID. As Regina says, you know, the start of the pandemic was truly frightening. We were at wit's end, particularly as a small museum, how we could possibly continue with our fundraising efforts without having people in the building. It took us some months, frankly, but we recovered nicely. We did embrace technology and virtual exhibitions. We've had 3 now, and they have all gone well in terms of the online traffic. As Regina said, we now can instead of worrying about getting people from Atlanta to drive an hour and a half to get to us, all we have to do is to convince people to go on to make a few clicks on their computer, and they have us. Now there are still the practical issues. As we go forward, we are hoping by the end of this year to have our next exhibitions hybrid. But we've got to do even better as far as tying that to our fundraising. We are thinking of virtual memberships. We don't have it in place for the Driscoll show. It would have been a great one because we think that there is so much substance there that people would be happy to pay a small fee as a membership. In particular, granting them all of the benefits, other than being in the building. Well, actually, there will, as we are discussing it, there would be a limited, opportunity to actually to include, actual traffic in the building as part of that virtual membership. But again, it's an opportunity. That's the important point for us that we have realized, turning lemons into lemonade, and actually getting using this as an opportunity to attract more people throughout the country and the world. We have a Brotherhood of Man exhibition coming up in the next few months, and we will possibly have some artists featured from the continent who will be part of that show. The artist call, well, the artist call itself is closed. The curators have not finalized the list though, but
well, you'll have to share the link with us so we can continue to stay apprised of things going on at the museum.
I do want to say that as you talk about social justice and the audience that we have here tonight, there are ways to help museums like ours. I hope people will have heard enough about Steffen, Thomas, Mildred, and others that I've not mentioned by name, to understand just how rewarding it is to get involved and to help people who have much to give reach their potential, help them carry out their missions. I know that YANA has started actually the summer internship program. I recall as a junior at Yale receiving a small stipend to travel to Greenwood, Mississippi, to work on my senior thesis, which was on Richard Wright. And if people remember Black Boy, there was he spent a period of time both in Memphis and in Greenwood, where his aunt lived. And at the time that I was doing that research, she was still alive, and I got to interview her and get her views about her now famous nephew, and she was truly the difficult person that he portrayed in his books. But I would hope people will look for opportunities to connect with institutions like ours, for both the scholarship opportunities, for the summer experiences, for the just ways to, I mean, whether it be from a feminist studies standpoint, a African American studies standpoint, a fine arts standpoint, so much to get into. We've only scratched the surface of Steffen Thomas's story.
Yeah.
Same for Mildred though. So much that we can learn from these artists, from these people who've lived magnificent lives, that are tremendous breadcrumbs that I think we still have to, figure out exactly how to connect.
That's a beautiful takeaway, is sort of inviting everyone to look for opportunities to support these kinds of institutions and locally artists and people to allow them to flourish and do what they do. I'd like to take that thread just to help us close out with the other two. Jerome, what are your sort of takeaways, and considering this program also as a platform for messages, to try to help promote not only what you guys are doing, but what we would love to have ideally people do going forward. So please think of this as an opportunity to talk about, a takeaway from all this.
Yeah, I was thinking, to kind of, to both what Don and Regina was saying, but especially I think Regina talking about the kind of move online and how to make lemonade out of lemons. And what's been really profound, and this is where I'll plug a little bit Dark Matter University, if I can share my screen, is that there's new kinds of community that kind of come out of that are coming out of this moment, right? And especially for, I think, young people of color. So this is just a screenshot from the Zoom screens of Dark Matter University, where now, like, some of my colleagues from around the country are getting together. And what I think is really important about that is, and this is one of these classes that we're bringing together students and faculty who are so fragmented that normally there's no way to collaborate, like this. And so in this class, and I was thinking about this when Regina was talking about the lineage and being able to teach the lineage. And this is the amazing GSAPP quilts that we've been talking about in this class that I'm teaching. But this is a drawing that a student has made in one of these Dark Matter University courses that's being taught online, where my colleague Curry Hackett was having them, make sort of architectural drawings about, in this case, the go-go music scene in DC, right? This kind of inner city, hyper-regional form of dance, African-American dance. And really like valuing that kind of an experience and like talking about the relationship to jazz and to these kind of more historic forms in that container that we've been creating in this sort of alternative classroom space. So I just wanted to kind of bring that as an example of the sort of some of the interesting things that have come out of this moment, and like the kind of community that it's given some new ideas of the sorts of communities that we can create that can be difficult to create when you're so fragmented. But yeah, I think that's maybe my takeaway.
Yeah,
it's like
no,
even what we're doing right now, you know, is building community and building new kinds of networks and kind of crossing the airwaves with each other.
I can see some of the chats going on. I can tell that's a beautiful thing about being what we do with YANA, is that we get to be kind of in the hub and see people connecting, and you guys are doing that work too. But Regina, you'll get to close this out. Your sort of takeaways, anything you wanted to close with and set out there as.
So I'll say art matters. Black art is being seen in ways that it hasn't been before right now in this moment. And I'm very excited about that and feel a responsibility around that. And I'm thankful for spaces like this to share that. Some things from the Louis Armstrong House Museum. So I've been talking about Billy and Louis, and just put a link in the chat to that Facebook conversation. So please check it out. We talk mostly about Billie Holiday, but we also talk about race and class and power, and gender and sexuality. So check it out if you have a chance. And then coming up in a couple of weeks, we're going to try for the very first time a virtual tour of the house. And so I'm excited to put that together. And then sometime in the fall, fingers crossed, knock on all the wood, we're going to be able to invite people into our space physically when we open that new 14,000 square foot center across the street from the historic home. So if you make your way to Corona, Queens, if you're doing a layover at LaGuardia, we would love to see you there.
Awesome. You know, talking of community, and I hate to let you guys go, but we've already been here for like an hour and a half. Thank you to Jerome, to Regina, and Don for sharing your work, your experiences, your motivations, your history. I think it's just amazing. I hope we can do more of these. Please, anyone who's in the audience and for our three panelists, if you have anything extra you would love to be able to pass along, we've gotten to the habit now. We'd like to send very long, deep resources lists so people can definitely get to your organization. But if there's a particular piece of music, if there's a picture of an art piece of art or something else you want people to kind of remember and take away, we'll include the links of that, because it all goes together and there's so many overlaps. We don't want to lose that, and if someone forgets, I don't want to forget. So we'll gather more information from you later. But thank you very, very much. I can see lots of thank yous in our chat room. Stay well, stay healthy, keep doing the work that you guys do, and as always, let us know how we can help. And thank you again. So be safe, and we'll talk to you hopefully in the very near future.
Great.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So great to meet you. It's an honor.
Beautiful to have you. Thank you, John.
Be well, everyone. Bye.
Bye.